Hey adventurers, so we are back for my episode review of Season 2, Episode 2 of The Rings of Power. And yeah, this is an interesting episode for me. Yeah, let's go through my thoughts. The first thing that I wrote down, I really like Gandalf. I really like the way that this actor is portraying this character, and even the writing for this character to some degree. It's not as good as Gandalf from the books, but as an individual character in an individual show, I don't dislike him. I actually think he's doing rather well. Narvi is great. The portrayal of this character, who's a character who doesn't have a ton of information about him in the books, but the way that he is portrayed is very fun. I really enjoy seeing how Narvi is being portrayed. But they do call him a delve master, and I don't think he's a delve master because he was a crafter, and he works directly with Celebrimbor on a lot of things, including the creation of the doors of Durin, of the doors of Moria. Yeah. So I think he's more of a crafter than a delve master, but at least in his portrayal, I'm enjoying the way that he's being portrayed and how the actor is portraying him. The dwarven hazing ritual was kind of, it's not a ritual, but just the way that the other dwarves are treating Prince Durin, who is no longer prince at this point in time, I feel is okay. It doesn't bother me in the slightest because he is different, and these people, he hasn't worked in the same way. I'm not sure that I agree with exactly how they are treating the dwarf in terms of him having blisters, him having problems as a laborer. I don't feel like that's accurate, but at the same time, I don't actually mind much of what they're doing with him in terms of how they're treating him as a dwarf and as now a common. I noticed it earlier in the episode than at this point where I wrote it down, but I noted down that it's still not a beard. It's definitely not a beard, but Disa's facial hair is more noticeable, and I will give them props for that. They need to go all in and just give her a straight up beard. But since they haven't, they have made her facial hair a bit more noticeable, and I'm not going to fault them for that, other than to say it still needs to be a beard. I mentioned last episode how I felt that Elrond was different. The portrayal, the writing for Elrond in this season was drastically different than how he was portrayed in last season, and that it didn't make sense. And that's still the case. I said Elrond is still a bit wrong, but much better than last episode. And I agree with that. I feel like that's the case. I feel like in this episode, there's some things that are just a little bit off about his character. He feels too mortal in everything that he does. I want to say human, but they, in many ways, obviously they're not humans, they're elves, but the difference between a human and an elf is the mortality. That's really the biggest difference between them in Lord of the Rings. And there are some other differences. I'm not saying that that's the only difference, but that is something major. And so the problems that dwarfs have, or the problems that elves have, are such that they would not be the problems that mortals have in terms of relationships, in terms of getting frustrated with each other and stuff like that. It's that doesn't work in the same way. But whatever. Anyways, the points being, Elrond still feels a bit wrong, but he's much better than last episode. And I wrote that down. My next note: the elves' quarrels are so mortal, and yeah, that's kind of exactly what I'm trying to say with this. Is that sure, Galadriel and Elrond are close friends. They've been friends for a very long time. They know each other very well, and they're arguing as two humans would argue, not as two elves would argue. And I don't understand that. I understand it because the writers wrote it that way. That I understand that from a human perspective. But from an elven perspective, that doesn't make sense. The reason why their quarrels would be so petty, so mortal in that way. Not saying that human quarrels are petty to us humans, because they're not. They're very important. But to an elf, they would be very petty. Anyways, we do get a Daeron shout out. How did they say it? Daeron or something like that. Which is cool, because that's a fairly deep lore thing. But it is cool just to see that shout out there, and yeah. If you know the lore, that's a good shout out. I don't think that they should have had Círdan shave in this episode, but even without the beard, he looks and feels like an old elf, not an old human, like an old elf. And that was something that I was worried about, because with the beard he looks very human, but without it he looks like a elf that has lived a long time and has seen a lot of stuff. And so I appreciate that. Also his wisdom, the conversation that he was having with Elrond in that scene, that's a very good, very elven conversation, and I did not dislike that at all. I did write that it was a rather convenient way for Gandalf to find his staff. Obviously, if you watch further in the episode, it's not the true staff, but just having Poppy run up to the well and toss the stick out, it's, again, I talked in my review of episode 1 about how there's a lot of stuff that's very on the nose, and that's one of those things that's just very on the nose, and it's unnecessary, but I can't, because of what happens the rest of the episode, I don't hate it. It's still not my favorite way. I don't love the quest item feel that this staff is having for Gandalf, but he is so much like Obi-Wan, and I mentioned this last episode. I really like that. I really like the Obi-Wan-isms, I guess, that are coming through his portrayal, and I don't think that the actor is purposely taking inspiration from Obi-Wan Kenobi for this performance of this character. I don't think that's the case. However, there are some similarities. Maybe the writing is, but there are some similarities in the characters that I am seeing, partly because I know Star Wars so well, that when I see them in other characters, I can recognize them as being similar to this other thing. And I appreciate that. I don't dislike that at all. We do get the creation of Ithilden in this episode, or not even the creation, the presentation, I guess, of Ithilden for the first time. And I don't mind that. I like the way that it was done. It's clear that Celebrimbor is experimenting, is playing around with things, and none of that I hate. I don't have any issue with that. And it was cool to see the Ithilden done, especially because it's going to become important very quickly. Again, Vickers is really good. The writing for Sauron has improved greatly in this episode. The manipulativeness, the deceptiveness, and then Charlie Vickers as an actor portraying all of that as Halbrand, as Sauron. That's really good. I genuinely have no issue with that. I think that he's done a very good job with a character that is admittedly very hard to do, especially when you are missing so much context for his character because you don't have rights to all the lore. The first true lore issue that I found in this episode, and there's little things, sure, but the first true lore issue that is rather larger is that all the rings were originally made for the elves, and once again the other rings were made before the three were made after the 7 and the 9, and then the 3 were made, and then the 1 at the very last. So that's obviously a lore issue, but also having Halbrand or Sauron or Anatar talk about creating the other rings. Can you make rings for men? I came to ask you to make rings for men. That's not accurate at all. The rings were not originally thought of, oh, I want to give these to men. I want to create these specifically for humans, for men, so that we can corrupt them. That's not how they were presented, at the very least. When Celebrimbor with the help of Anatar created the 9 rings and the 7 rings, it was with the intent that they were learning, that they were improving their ring craft, and that they could use those themselves. Ultimately, they created the 3 rings, which were much more of a masterpiece, and ultimately they gave the 9 to the humans and the 7 to the dwarves. So that's a lore issue. Because it's consistent with the lore of last season, of season 1, I'm not gonna get super mad at it, but still it is an actual lore difference, made greater lore difference in this show. I wrote down, how does everybody know to call it Mordor already? Because everybody, they shouldn't have heard this term this term was not in use last season. All that they did was, when the Southland, or when Mount Doom erupted and created what is now Mordor, everything was the Southlands, and Waldreg and the orcs were saying, what are we supposed to call it now if we can't call it the Southlands? And all that Adar did was started grinning, started smiling, and it panned up and showed that burnt out the Southlands and changed it to Mordor. So that title card is only there as a title card. None of the other characters should have that. Even if Adar does know that name, none of the other characters should know that name as of yet, especially none of the elven characters, none of the other characters who've had any interaction with anything to the south at this point. The only people who should know that are the people who are in Mordor. And so why everybody is already calling it Mordor, I don't know, and I don't love that that's the case, but it is what it is, and technically that is the name of it. I just don't know why they called it, or why they're automatically calling it Mordor when nobody should know that name at this point. They should, if they collectively decided, okay, we're no longer going to call this the Southlands, we're going to call this Mordor, that's one thing. That doesn't make sense, and that shouldn't happen. But there needs to be a reason why everybody's calling it something different. Something that I noticed all throughout this episode, and not just with Anatar, but with Gandalf as well, is there's some biblical imagery going on in this episode, and I don't hate it. I find that I don't hate it. It's maybe not my favorite, but there's some things that I don't hate about it. It's fitting for Tolkien. There's a lot of biblical imagery within the Lord of the Rings, within the Silmarillion especially, and I don't hate that. It's fitting for Tolkien, who is a devout Catholic, but it's also fitting for Sauron as the deceiver and as an antichrist figure within that world, that he would do some things that are very biblical imagery, some very Christian. The imagery that's invoked is very Christian. And so I don't hate that that's what's happening, even though the religions of the world are slightly different, even though the things don't exist the same way in Middle-earth as they do on Earth. I don't hate the biblical imagery because it fits with the character, it fits with the story, and it fits even to some degree with Tolkien's themes. But if I remember correctly, Anatar was thought to be an elf, not known to be a Maya. I may be wrong about that. I don't remember exactly, but I believe that he was thought to be an elf, just another elf that was there. But either way, the manner in which they chose to tell that part of the story, it doesn't bother me that he presents himself as a Maya to Celebrimbor, because quite frankly, that's about the only way that you could work with where you came from last season and stay consistent to what you did in the last season to continue telling a story that actually makes sense and is a little bit closer to the lore with what they're doing. And so I don't hate that that's the case. It doesn't really bother me that they're choosing to go that route with Anatar's story, or with Sauron's story. As you may have noticed with me talking through my thoughts here, first off, my first thought didn't happen. I really like Gandalf didn't happen until like 15-20 minutes into the episode. So that's pretty good. I don't have a ton of thoughts either. And what you'll notice is that it's largely fairly positive. My thoughts on this episode were largely fairly positive. There was a couple things that I don't love, but because they're consistent with the lore of this show specifically, because they're consistent with what this show is specifically doing, and because they are not so egregiously different, I don't hate it. And so basically I have no true issues with this episode. Last episode I had some. This episode I have some minor issues that are things that I don't like because they're clearly different in the lore, but because of how last season was, and because they're trying to stay faithful while also trying to be a little bit closer to the actual lore, I don't hate it. I'm okay with the way that they are doing things, and so no true issues. I thought it was a solid episode of a fantasy TV show. It kept my interest. I wasn't too bored the entire time. There were a few scenes that I thought drew on a little bit too long, that weren't the greatest or whatnot, but overall it kept my interest and I wasn't bored. I don't feel like I was about to fall asleep all the time. And it introduced some interesting things, even things like the mystics from last season. The way that they're being used in this season, I'm okay with. I don't know if this wizard guy is supposed to be Sauron or Saruman. I don't like it. I love Kieran Hines as the character. If Kieran Hines is supposed to be playing Saruman, that's a great choice. But whether or not he is, I don't like that this. If this is Saruman, I don't like how he is being used in the story as somebody who is already corrupted, who is already seeking the destruction of or his own gain, his own power. I don't like that because Saruman wasn't always like that. He wasn't like that until he started searching for the ring himself, because that's when the ring took a hold on him and he became corrupted. And so no, I like how the mystics are being used. I don't mind it. I find that the masks and the costuming for the Easterlings is what they are. They're from Rune. I feel that they're a bit too sci-fi, a bit too Star Wars-ish, but at the same time, it's a different culture, and it's very clearly showing how different this culture is. And so I don't hate it. It's not my favorite, but the way that the mystics are being used, I don't mind. The fact that we are getting other wizards that may or may not be Istari, I don't mind, because if you look into the lore, there are other wizards. It talks about the rods of the 5 wizards, and it talks about how there's 2 blues, 1 brown, 1 gray, and 1 white, and how those are the Istari. Those are messengers and helpers sent from the Valar to Middle-earth to assist in the opposition of Sauron. You know that those 5 wizards are very specific, that they have a very specific role. However, if you also read into the lore, it talks about how that the people just assumed that Gandalf was another wizard, another human wizard, because there's other wizards in the world. And so if that's what they're going with, I don't know why they purposefully chose to make this Ciarán Hinds character so similar visually to Saruman. But if that's what they're going with, I don't hate it. It's fine having a powerful human wizard who is the leader of a whole bunch of mystics, of basically a magical cult. And then they're seeking Sauron, they're seeking their own gain. I don't mind that. That can be an interesting storyline. Yeah, basically this episode introduced some interesting things, and for the first time in this show, I think that I can say I genuinely enjoyed an episode of Rings of Power. We will see if that continues. But as of episode 2, I enjoyed it. Is it the best thing ever? No. Is it perfect Lord of the Rings or Tolkien? No, it's not. But what I can say is, as an episode of a fantasy TV show, this is about a 7.5 out of 10. Not utterly fantastic, but solid, really solid. And as an episode of Lord of the Rings, I don't know exactly where to put it, because there are so many things that are lore inaccurate because of how they were done in the first season. But by staying accurate to season 1 and also trying to be a little bit more accurate to the lore, it's actually improved it. And I'm seeing some things that are more Tolkienian, even if they're not book accurate. It's starting to feel like an adaptation of Tolkien's work, rather than just, we're going to use the names that Tolkien created and create our own thing. So because of that, I wrote it as an episode of something Lord of the Rings related, 7 of 10. I don't know. I think maybe 6.5 or even 6 is maybe more accurate, more closer. But as I was thinking about it, it's better than a 5 of 10, which is just the bare minimum it should be to not be good, not be bad. Should be a 5 of 10, and it's a little bit better than so 6 of 10 would be a little bit better than that, but it's more than a little bit better than that. So I can't quite justify putting it as like a 7.5 of 10 or an 8 or anything like that, but somewhere between a 6 and a 7. I'm okay with that. A 6 or a 7 out of 10 for a Lord of the Rings episode, I don't mind. I feel like that's definitely an improvement. So yeah, we are seeing improvement in a show that very possibly could have been horrible, and it still may. That's episode 2 of, I believe there's 8 episodes this season as well. So it could still very possibly fail and be frustrating and not be good, and introduce something like the Mithril debacle from last season. And I'm not getting my hopes up that it's going to be something amazing, but one episode this has been one of the best episodes that we've gotten. Episode 2 has been one of the best episodes we've gotten. So I hope that this trajectory of improvement continues. I don't know that it will, but I do hope that it's better. So anyways, I'm fairly pleasantly surprised. I'm excited to watch episode 3. I want to see what's going to happen. I want to see how they're going to continue this story. And interestingly enough, I don't want to leave these storylines that we're currently following. I don't want to move to Numenor, which I know next episode will touch on. I don't want to. I have no desire to. I want to continue with the storylines that we're following. And so I have some interest in this show. And that's interesting to me. That's what I want. I want to be interested in the show. I want to be enjoying this show. It's still possible that it could crash and burn. I fully acknowledge that. I'm not even saying that I like the show, but I didn't dislike episode 2, season 2. So anyways, that's my thoughts for season 2, episode 2 of The Rings of Power. Thank you guys for watching an Erudite Adventure. I'll have my thoughts for episode 3 fairly soon here, and then I will try and get better about it. It'll probably be, I believe episodes come out on Thursday, so I'll probably watch it Thursday, film a review Thursday night or Friday, and then it won't come out till Saturday probably for my review of the episodes, but I think that's probably going to be the plan. Other than that, I'll have my regular scheduled Thursday videos. Anyways, thank you guys for watching an Erudite Adventure. We will see you guys again soon. Stay warm.